All right, welcome to this video about understanding Office 365 connectors for groups. My name is Simon Jaeger, and I work as a technical evangelist at Microsoft, focusing on Office and Office 365 development. So to start things off, I want to point out that I do have a blog post about the exact same topic, where I'm going to cover everything in terms of the same procedures that we're going to take in this video. So if you prefer to follow along in text instead, go ahead and check out the blog post at simonjaeger.com. Now, the first place I want to take you to is an Office 365 group. And if you don't know what that is essentially a way to put a lot of users within an Office 365 tenant together and give them a tool to collaborate. What I mean by that is that we have a shared conversation flow. We have a shared calendar. We also have a shared file space, a notebook. And the last thing here is something that's called connectors. And connectors is a way for you to feed relevant data from other services into this particular Office 365 group. The best way to learn about which connectors that you already have available is essentially to go and click on that button. And doing so, you'll be able to browse the different connectors that are already available. You'll find everything from Trello to Twitter. You can pull in RSS feeds, pull in data from Wunderlist. And if I go ahead and choose one of these guys, I'll have information and data that this service has chosen to share with this particular group, being put straight into the conversation flow. What that means is that I'm going to get notifications, I'm going to get emails about the different services and the connectors that I put in here. So it's a great way of aggregating data into this Office 365 group without having to essentially go out and reach out to each and every individual service. Now, to kick off, in order to understand how does an actual Office 365 connector for group work, we're going to start off by adding an incoming webhook connector. You can simply browse to find it, and if you don't, you can simply go ahead and search for it, like so. What I'm going to do here is to click on the add button, and now the only really thing that we have to do here is to give this incoming webhook connector a name. So I'm going to name this something like my connector. And if you don't know what a webhook is, it's essentially a way of creating a callback or registering a callback within a service. So it's a common concept that you've seen around for a while, and it's a way to essentially register perhaps your own service within another service to be notified about changes or events. To be more precise, that could be, for instance, you could have your own service that registers with the Microsoft Graph about notifications that are happening within a file storage. Say a user is adding a file or adding an email or something of that sort. And the Microsoft Graph, in this case, is able to notify your own service about this change, and you're able to act upon this. So I gave my incoming webhook here a name, and I chose create. And what we're now given is essentially the webhook URL, or the callback URL, if we will. So we're going to go ahead and simply save this thing. And I'm going to store mine into Notepad here. And now to illustrate a bit about how does this actually work, or actually the first thing I might want to point out here is that if we go back into the Office 365 group and we're in the conversation feed, you'll find that we also got a new activity here. And if you click on it, you'll see that we added the incoming webhook here. But to understand how they work and how do you actually go on about feeding information now into this conversation flow or this Office 365 group, if you will, we're going to go ahead and get into Visual Studio. And what I'm going to do is create a simple console application. And it really doesn't matter how you go on about doing this. The only really thing that you need to be able to do is to issue a simple network call. So the code here that I'm going to write or essentially copy from the blog post is going to be extremely straightforward. I'm going to walk you through what the actual code is going to do. But the first thing I'm going to do here is to click on New Project. I'm going to make sure that I'm in the Windows templates and create just a console application. Let's call this connector console application. And while that's creating, I'm going to pop over to my blog post and find some code here. You'll notice if we're in the conversation feed, what we have is this notion of cards. And these cards are essentially what we want to create and what we want to feed information into. And the cool thing about this here is that you don't have to actually create these cards yourself. What you simply supply is essentially what is it that you want to be included within this card. And then Office 365 is going to take care of actually rendering that and putting out the HTML here. So because these cards are able to be in multiple different places. You'll find them here in the Office 365 web space, but you'll also be able to find them in individual emails. So if you would have to render these things in the various different places where the cards can exist, that would be a challenge. So you'll be very happy to know that how you do this is simply by telling Office 365 what you want to be rendered, and the rendering job is being taken care of for you. And the way that you do that is to what I actually swapped over to here is to describe everything with a Json payload. This Json payload can be very simple with everything from simply saying that, all right, I got a text element here, and it can be even so complex as having multiple different sections with different parts about what we call facts here, which are essentially like the structure of a name and value. You'll have images, you'll have actions that you can take upon this card. So they can be fairly complex. And the best way to kind of learn about what are the different parts that you can put into the Json payload is to essentially go to the dev.outlook.com/connectors/reference webpage. And in here, you'll actually find the different pieces and bits that you can put into a card, which is supported currently, and that we will take care of the rendering piece and put that into place for you. So what I'm going to do is to simply grab this more complex piece because it's a little bit more fun to show off. And in order for us to use that and put that into the console application, we're going to have to do a little bit of formatting here that I'm going to do in Notepad. So what I'm going to do first and foremost is to replace all of the quotes in the appropriate format. And then I also have this piece where I have to add another backslash essentially. And at this point, I can simply put this into a variable in my newly created solution here. And what I'm going to do here now is to just go down here and copy and paste some code. So what we're going to make sure is to grab the HTTP client. We're going to grab this helper function that allows us to do a post request. We're going to be sure to import any required references here. Let's actually make that a const string to make everything look good. And at this point, we also want to paste the following piece. And the last piece that I need here to actually have this application compile is a webhook URL. That webhook URL is that URL that we created from the connector, the incoming webhook connector. And we can go ahead and simply define it up here as following. And now we're pretty much done. The code at this point is going to compile. So what we have is we have the JSON payload that describes the card. And then what we do is to post this JSON straight to that endpoint, that connector webhook URL that we were given. And it's a very straightforward thing that we're doing. If you're familiar with C# terms, we're using that HTTP built-in stack to essentially post a content. And that piece of content is a string content. We're making sure to have that encoded in UTF-8. And the really I guess the generic thing that you want to make sure is that your content type header is set to application/JSON, so that we know that what you're actually sending to the webhook URL is an actual JSON payload. So we can go ahead and actually run this thing, and hopefully we'll see everything compile and actually be given a status after the request has been sent. Now it says OK. That comes from us actually just printing the response code that we're given from the request. And if I now go back into that Office 365 group, you'll find that I have a new activity here. And if I choose to show that, I'm actually given this fairly complex card, which is entirely described by that JSON that I pasted from my blog post. So it's got the facts here, which is essentially the name and value representation. It's got images. It's actually got even GIFs in here that are being shown properly in this scene. And you also have an action here that you can take. And in this case, it's a button that it simply takes you back to my blog post, or actually back to my blog in general. And if you want to learn more and also follow along a bit more in text or a bit more in detail, I do encourage you to go out and check out the blog post. You'll also find pointers to where you can go and learn more. A great resource, which has already been mentioned, is the dev.outlook.com/connectors page. And in here, you'll find everything from getting started, learning more about building your own, and also a great reference of what you can do in terms of building out the connector cards that you can share. So with that, I hope that gave you a great understanding of what an Office 365 connector is, and essentially how they actually work a little bit more underneath the hood.